And the segment that I prepared today is educational. And why have I done this educational segment? I have spent a year in Brazil now, and I'm really all about making the life of everyday Brazilians better and everyone around me better. What we'll just talk about is non-political, 100% education regarding topics that people want to talk about and people want to hear. I'm not going to give you guys investment advice, but I will talk about why the hell the Bitcoin price has been moving up. Why is the dollar going up? What's the reason behind everything? Hey guys, it's SeeEl, and today we're here with the first episode of SeeEl the Deal, where we'll try to educate you guys non-politically, just based on facts and just based on articles. As you guys know, 6.09 real to the dollar. It's been a source of hot debate, and it has been an absolute nightmare for a lot of importers. So if you guys don't understand how international trade works, obviously when you import a good from the United States, you're paying in dollars. You have to pay the source currency. Or if you're paying the dollar and the real is devaluing, you're essentially paying more for a product. But it's been great for exporters because real has devalued, 20% over the last year compared to the dollar. So this means, less compared to the won, but compared to the dollar. So that means exports are easier to do. But it's been a huge pain for the everyday Brazilians, and inflation has been a really, really big problem. And people don't know why things like this are happening. People don't know why. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off with, what is money? What is money? Has anyone thought about what money is? Because a lot of you guys just think money is just paper. Money is just a number in your bank account. Money is an exchange, a medium of exchange for one, yes. But I think more importantly, money is time. If you have money, you have liquidity, you're able to buy someone else's time. And money is, in a way, a representation of time. So back in the Stone Ages, people used to trade, for example, seashells. Seashells could be money. And then they moved on to precious metals like gold and silver. So gold and silver used to be money. But gold and silver, back in the day where they didn't have electronics, didn't actually have an inherent value other than jewelry. Gold has only really seen a strong use case in modern day society through science and through computer chips. Before computer chips, back in the Roman ages, back in the 10th century, what were people going to use gold for? They were only going to use gold for jewelry. So essentially, people knew that gold was hard to find, silver was hard to find, so it became a value and a store of time, because it would take a long time for people to get it, and a lot of people wanted it, right? And it's the same for food. Food takes time. And certain goods take longer time to produce. For example, raw rice and beans, right? Straight from the farm is going to be cheaper than processed rice. It's going to be cheaper than cooked rice, because what you get at, for example, a restaurant is time spent to cook that rice and other resources like gas and electricity. So money in general is time. And I think it's just essentially a store of value for people to pay one another. But nowadays, I think what's really important about money is inflation, because the cup of coffee, for example, if you went to the United States and bought a coffee in 1970, it would cost me 25 cents. But nowadays it costs me $3. People are not understanding why the hell, if money is a store of time, why the hell is the same cup of coffee worth more? Why am I paying more? I'm earning my ass off. I'm earning 1,000, 2,000 reais a month, and my reais are worth less. Well, the simple answer to that is that you also earn more. And if you're in a balanced economy, you're in a good economy, you're going to earn more as time passes. But to truly understand inflation, what you really need to understand is the factors that influence inflation. So inflation essentially is a rise in goods and services. And there are three main factors: production costs, demand, and fiscal policy. So what do I mean by this? Well, production costs are the cost that it costs to produce, like, for example, a can, or the cost that it produced to build a remote, the amount of money it costs to build something. Because if it costs more money to build something, you need to charge more for it. But exclusivity is also something else. For example, if you can build computer chips and no one else in the world can build computer chips, people just have to pay whatever the hell they ask. The second is demand. The more demand there is on a product, the higher the price is going to be. And if there's a huge amount of demand and people can't keep up with the amount with supply, that's going to cause inflation. And then obviously fiscal policies is how our banks react to the economy and how they decide interest rates. And so the first thing we need to do to truly understand money and why the value of money is moving are these three things. And the first topic that I'd want to talk about is COVID-19, because most people don't seem to understand why inflation happened at such a rapid pace during COVID-19. It's very simple, right? If you look at the supply and demand curve in traditional economics, essentially the more supply you have and the less demand you have, the lower the price is going to be. So what you do is you go up the list and you say how much supply there is. Okay, there's a lot of supply, right? But there's also very little demand. Okay, you can charge a very high price, right? But if there's more demand, it kind of meets at an equilibrium. So essentially, it's very simple. The more of something you have, the less valuable it becomes unless demand follows. And traditional economics always want to go for a state of equilibrium. So basically, they want to match supply to demand so that the producers are getting the fair amount of compensation for their actions, and the buyers, the purchasers, the customers are paying a fair amount. And it's the same for money. So if there is more money in the system, then the money is going to be worth less. And essentially what you're looking at in terms of currency devaluation is an inflation on the currency. Even before that, let's talk about COVID again. During COVID, everyone stayed in their homes, right? Everyone used to stay in their homes, and production costs went through the roof, right? Because people couldn't leave to build whatever they wanted. People couldn't go to work. So everywhere in the world, prices for goods went up, and they never really went down. Because if you're a corporation, if you're a greedy corporation, and your primary job is to produce profits for your shareholders, once you raise the prices, are you going to bring them back down? Probably not, right? And so the first thing that happened in COVID-19 was that people would essentially want goods, but the cost of goods would go up because there was not enough people producing them. For example, just because there's 200 million people in Brazil not going to work, it doesn't mean it costs any less food to buy that food. Does that make sense, guys? If anyone wants to buy an energy drink during COVID-19, the demand for energy drinks are not going to go down, but the cost of production is going to go up. So what happened during COVID-19 was price of goods went up massively. But what also happened was fiscal policy. So during COVID-19, because there's a lack of productivity, people printed a lot of money. And this is where the next point comes in. The third point, which is fiscal policy, also affects our money value, our monetary value. So essentially, every government has what's called a central bank. Every government has what's called a central bank, or most governments, not every. And what a central bank is essentially a big-ass bank. It's a financial institution that has the privilege of controlling your money. So back in the day, the central bank could only issue currency based on the reserve of gold and silver, at least for the United States. So this is what's called the gold standard. So if I have an X amount, for me to print a bunch of money, I need to back it up with a bunch of gold, right? But this is not necessarily a good thing. Has anyone watched the movie Gladiator? Well, in Gladiator, there's a famous emperor. And I actually have his book here, and they don't talk about it, called Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. His name was Marcus Aurelius. And the Roman Empire, despite being a silver-based currency, all of their currency, all their dineros, were backed by silver, they ended up having inflation too. Why? Because what they did was they just printed a bunch more cash with less silver in them. So nowadays what we have is a central bank that's not actually backed by gold or silver. Nowadays it's backed by the government, and the government is backed by the people. So when you ask, okay, is Jerome Powell, the current head of the Federal Reserve in the United States, able to just print money? No. There's a lot of memes going around saying he can just print money and essentially just be like, okay, I'll print more money to fix the economy, but that's actually not what's happening at all. What's actually happening is all these guys from the central bank give what's called a government bond. The biggest spender of currency in Brazil, in the United States, everywhere across the world is their own government. And the reason this is really important is because you need to build things like roads, you need to pay for the military, you need to pay for medical goods, right? So what happens is the government is able to essentially appoint a group of ministers that go on to the central bank, and they elect the chairman of the Federal Reserve. At least in Brazil, it's like that. In the United States, they actually just appoint the head directly. And essentially, these guys just listen to the government and on what they say, and they also put out their own kind of rules. I mean, in detail, what really happens in the central government is their job is to reduce inflation, decrease unemployment. It's essentially a good thing. But the government basically needs to spend more than they can spend. So for example, if you look at the national debt of the United States, the government holdings of debt has gone up significantly in the last years, right? And it's because spending has gone up, especially after COVID. See this big jump? Especially after COVID, people were printing a metric shit ton of money. And people were able to print money in the United States because the government essentially said we need to spend more money. And what they do is they issue these bonds. So it's an IOU. So these governments don't just get to print money for free. They have to pay it back. They issue bonds, and the central bank essentially lends the money, and they have to pay interest on that bond, or they have to pay back the principal. And the way the government generates income is through taxes, right? So the majority of the income comes from taxes, and anything that's left over, so we call this fiscal debt, right, is basically printed by the central bank, and people are able to use more money than they have. But it is a debt. And the biggest buyers of government bonds, other than the central bank, is other governments. So for example, Japan is the largest holder of the US government bond in the world. So they actually buy these government bonds to park their well-earned Japanese yen. And the government, the US government essentially says, okay, every year we'll pay this amount. And how often and how well you pay back these bonds as a government affects your credit rating. So all you guys have credit ratings, right? So you go to the government, you have a credit card, and you pay for things, right? The more often you're actually paying back those debts, the higher your credit rating. Anything below a triple B is considered a junk bond. And by that it means, oh, there's a huge amount of, there's a very big chance that they actually default and not pay back. So Brazil is actually considered a junk bond, if you guys don't know. Brazil is actually considered a junk bond because you guys have actually restructured your debt before. So to summarize really quickly, money is time. The value of money has always changed. And before, money used to be backed by gold and silver, right? Before that, it used to be backed by real goods. It was a trade-based economy. But just because it was backed by gold and silver doesn't mean it was better. In fact, you can easily inflate currency because you can simply just put less silver in your currency, which is what happened to the Roman Empire. It was one of the biggest reasons they fell. So nowadays, people appoint a board of governors in Banco do Brasil to elect a head of the central bank. And this central bank listens to the government, and the government essentially borrows money from the central bank and pays an interest, which is called a government bond. And the spending has gone up, and because there is more money in the system, so let's go back to our supply-demand curve. If there's more money in the system, and there's less demand, then your currency goes down. Your currency valuation goes down. So essentially, when you look at like inflation, it just comes down to higher demand, higher cost of production, and fiscal policy just being there being more money than there used to be compared to what people need. But is this a bad thing? Well, the gold standard, there's a lot of negative things about gold standard. We're gonna skip this part because there's a little bit of politics involved. But in general, a little bit of inflation can be good. So if you have 2 or 3% of inflation, printing money like this is not bad at all, because essentially, if you have low inflation and not deflation, if your money is worth a little bit less year after year, it's because the government is lending out money for cheaper to consumers, to businesses, right? The interest rates are lower. If there's less interest, there's going to be more cash in the market. The central bank controls the amount of cash flow, supply of cash, by lending out government bonds, but also raising or lowering the interest rate. So the higher the interest rate, the more likely people are going to keep their money in the bank. Because without doing anything, like imagine you have 1,000 reais, and you put the 1,000 reais in a bank, and if you do nothing, it goes up 12% a year, which is what's happening in Brazil, right? Why would you risk it in the stock market? Why would you even use money? In general, higher interest rates and deflation or low interest causes less consumer spending. This is a fact. So essentially what happens is when people, a lot of people hate inflation, but it's actually a good thing. It's actually a really good thing, because if you have a little bit of inflation, it encourages borrowing, it encourages spending, and the government and the economy grows. So businesses don't have to suffer, people are employed generally. So what central governments opt to aim for always is 2 to 3% inflation per year. But when it gets too high, it's a big problem. So yeah, Brazil's credit rating is not so good. And that's one of the reasons why currency inflation is happening more, because people are just simply not willing to lend money to Brazil unless it's at a higher interest rate. And Brazil has historically generated some credit defaults. So that's one of the reasons. But what's also important is if you look at interest rates in rising economies, and this is from India Group today, what you're seeing here is India 6.5%, US at 5.3%. Essentially the money that you get from the bank, right? Brazil is at 14%. And the reason Brazilian interest rates are so criminally high is because, and this is for borrowers too, if you borrow money from credit cards, you're paying a higher interest rate. It's because they want to control inflation. They don't want to encourage spending. So if you're like a Brazilian person, and you're like a central bank member, people are like, okay, we can't have people borrow more money because we want less money in the ecosystem. So let's go back for a second. You know, the head of the central bank, right, and your government policy is looking at the market and saying, okay, we have too much money. The way that we control inflation is through fiscal policy mostly and production costs and demand. So what we'll do is we'll try to reduce the amount of money there is in the system by raising the interest rate and by not letting people borrow money. So yeah, we have really outrageous interest rates in Brazil. And this is how they're trying to curb the interest rates, the curb the inflation in Brazil. And that's what inflation is. Inflation is essentially just time. And not inflation, money. And people are trying to stop people from borrowing more money, but people are anyway. And in the end, the sad part is all of this debt that the government is taking on in fiscal policy and all of this money, the value of the money is not backed by gold, it's backed by the Brazilian people. So when the real keeps going up like this, and where creditors are not really willing to look at Brazilian currency as much anymore, true losers in all of this are the Brazilian people. Because compared to, like, this essentially is what it's saying, is it's reducing our purchasing power parity. So if you have like 1,000 reais, your 1,000 reais is so much worth so much less compared to an American now who just held dollars. And it's a really, really sad state that Brazilian people are losing value on their own currency, their hard-earned currency. But it doesn't mean that they can just try to reduce inflation to zero, because that will kill the economy. There is one other thing that actually determines currency value. It depends if you're an importer or an export-based economy. Basically, the more of an export-based economy you are, the more that you sell goods, right? So if you're like Brazil and you sell a lot of natural resources, when people buy those goods from you, people have to buy the real. But what's happening essentially is there's less demand for real compared to the dollar. But it doesn't mean the dollar is worth, the real has essentially devalued compared to other currencies. For example, if you look at BRL to Korean won, it stayed mostly stable. So what people don't understand is there has been historic devaluation of the currency of the Brazilian real, but it hasn't actually devalued as much as people think compared to other economies. It's just that the American economy is incredibly strong right now. Now we're going to talk about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. So I don't know how many of you guys are holding cryptocurrency right now. Cryptocurrency is one of the biggest crazes. Once again, this is not financial advice. We're just going to talk about cryptocurrency news and also what cryptocurrency really is. If you had Bitcoin at the start of the year, you are very, very, very happy right now. It's up 175% to the year. And people are wondering, why the hell is this happening? Well, I think what's really important to know about Bitcoin is Bitcoin's valuation is just backed by the price that people are willing to pay. It's not backed by a government. It's only backed by people that think that it has value. For example, if I say that this can is worth $1 million and there's enough people willing to pay $1 million, this can is now worth $1 million. That's essentially what supply and demand is, right? That's how art valuations just get so crazy. If you think about it, for example, a work by Leonardo da Vinci, it's not going to put food in my mouth. People just think that it's incredibly valuable. That's why people will pay exorbitant amounts. And that's what Bitcoin essentially is. And of course, it's up a little bit less if you compare it to the dollar. And people are always asking me, what the hell is a Bitcoin? Why is it going up so much? Well, I think that Bitcoin, what it isn't, is it's not a store of value backed by anything significant. So when we talked about the central bank, and this is just a fact, When you look at a central bank, the central bank is backed by the government that it's working for. So for example, the central bank of the United States is backed by the United States government and also the most valuable economy in the world. But Bitcoin is not backed by anything. Bitcoin is owned by a lot of people. The main idea behind Bitcoin is that it's scarce, but it's not actually scarce. There's a limited number, but you can divide it infinitely. And so Bitcoin is not actually backed by anything. This is not me shitting on Bitcoin at all. My first paycheck was in Bitcoin, and it's not talking about politics, but if you look at fundamentally what Bitcoin is there's nothing backing the Bitcoin. If you look at the dollar or the real, the dollar is backed by the United States government. The real is backed by the Brazilian government and therefore the Brazilian people. And a lot of people think that the Federal Reserve will have a Bitcoin reserve. This will never happen. Because once they accept a Bitcoin reserve and the United States government owns Bitcoin officially, then they are devaluing their own power. A lot of the power of the United States comes from the dollar. The power of the United States, a lot of it comes from their military and also their dollar. The dollar is the biggest reserve currency in the world. And the Federal Reserve will never agree to putting Bitcoin as their reserve, or if they do, it'll be an absolute disaster, because a lot of their power comes from the fact that the dollar is used for global trade. And so what Bitcoin is, in the end, is a speculative asset. That's what it is. Don't kill the messenger. It's a speculative asset. It's an idea, but it's not actually backed by anything. So if you actually look at the value of Bitcoin, it's actually not something that is backed by any government, aside from obviously El Salvador. And so the main idea behind Bitcoin is that it's non-touchable by any government. It is scarce in terms of the idea behind the Bitcoin. And do I think that Bitcoin is worthless? No, I think the idea of Bitcoin has caught on to enough people where the value of the Bitcoin will always be worth something. But the truth is it's not actually backed by anything, and therefore it doesn't have real value. And we have seen a crazy increase in Bitcoin price over the years. And if you come from a country, for example, like Turkey, where the price of your currency is worth less and less, or Argentina, or Venezuela, Bitcoin has been tremendously beneficial for you in terms of an anti-inflation hedge. But in reality, Bitcoin is not anti-inflationary at all. It's just that your currency has devalued to the point where anything else other than your currency has become worth more. For example, if you're in Argentina and you owned a cow, by that measure, that cow is anti-inflationary. But that cow is not anti-inflationary. If you have 1 million cows, and there's more cows than there used to be before, your cow is now worth less. So yeah, you have done tremendously well by holding Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is not anti-inflationary at all. Bitcoin is just energy. It's an idea. It's probably going to be around a long time, and people are still going to buy it, and people are going to put inherent value to it. But from an economic standpoint, it's not anti-inflationary at all. In fact, it's a very, very, very speculative asset. And you can see that Bitcoin all-time highs are generally followed by all-time lows when the CPI drops. So what the CPI means, basically, when you look at the Bitcoin trust in Grayscale, but also the price of Bitcoin in general, the price of Bitcoin drops whenever the interest rate is raised. Essentially, the more valuable traditional fiat becomes, the much less valuable Bitcoin becomes historically. So I've taken the pleasure of plotting the interest rate cuts and the interest rate of the US government, US futures, compared to Bitcoin. And as you can see, when you have a negative interest rate, people are going to buy, or when you have a lower interest rate, people are going to buy more and more debt. People are going to take on more and more debt. There's going to be more cash. Your cash is going to be worth less, and people are betting with this cash. So essentially, if you have $1 million in the bank, and that $1 million is worth less and less, people are going to try bet to keep the value of cash. People are going to spend it. People are going to start businesses. People are going to do a lot of things with their money to try and make more money, right? But in general, the Bitcoin price goes up when interest rates go down. That has always been the case. And so Bitcoin is essentially a speculative asset. So let's actually look at the world news right now. Evergrande, and I think something that we can liken to Bitcoin is real estate, because China has the biggest real estate market in the world. It's worth $43 trillion. $43 trillion. And they also have they had one of the largest real estate bubbles in the world, about 27%, 29% of the country's GDP at its peak. And so, well, what is the value of a house? The value of a house is not anti-inflationary either. The house, when you have more supply than demand, is a bubble. And what I mean by bubble is it's completely speculative. And when you look at Bitcoin's price right now, which is up 588% from its lows from a couple years ago, it is highly correlated with the S&P 500. So when you own, when stocks go up, what it's basically saying is Bitcoin goes up as well. And why do stocks go up? Stocks go up because debt becomes cheaper. If there's a lot of inflation and your money's worth less, people are buying stocks. If people have money and your money's getting worth less and less, people are trying to buy Bitcoin and making more of it. But if the bank is paying a high interest rate and your inflation is going down and your money's worth more and more every year, people are just simply not going to buy assets like Bitcoin. When S&P was down 3%, Bitcoin was down 51% because of fiscal policy. So when people start to reduce the supply of cash, and when cash becomes worth more, the price of Bitcoin has historically gone down, has always historically gone down. And so Bitcoin is actually not a hedge against inflation at all. It's a highly speculative asset that's not backed by anything. So that's the truth. And so when you look at Chinese real estate, it's not backed by anything as well. If people don't live in the houses don't generate rent. You're purely speculating on the idea that the houses will go up in value in the future. And I think that's something that's really important in all of this, is that people will place value on something that they think is valuable, but it's not always really valuable if it doesn't have real world cases. And that's why a lot of billionaires nowadays are buying farms. And something that is really important to think about when it comes to Bitcoin is to read up on what people think about Bitcoin nowadays. And this is a book called The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. It's one of the main textbooks when it comes to investing, actually, for economic students. And this is the page from The Intelligent Investor. What they say is like, when words like this pop up, you need to be careful. The opportunity of a lifetime. It's a prime bank. This baby's going to move. It's guaranteed. A lot of the words that I hear online, and this is financial caution that I'm wanting to everyone, is people say, oh, it's guaranteed more money if you buy Bitcoin. It's guaranteed to go up. It's unhackable. With quantum computing, it might be actually hackable in the next 10 years, according to Google. Bitcoin may no longer be safe with quantum computing. And I'm not saying cryptocurrency is a bad thing, but I'm just saying that there's always a word of warning when it comes to investing in cryptocurrency. Do I think it'll go up or down? I don't know. In fact, I think, maybe Bitcoin goes up. It's not financial advice. I'm not Notre Dame. I can't read into the future. I can't read into the future and tell you if Bitcoin will go up or down. Maybe it's a great investment. That's up to you. I will never talk about financial advice in this channel. But what I will say is you need to understand that the real idea behind this cryptocurrency and the real idea behind everything comes down to fiscal policy. It comes down to government bonds. It comes down to the United States Central Bank and the Brazilian Central Bank. It comes down to how much they're willing to deflate their currency, how much supply of currency there is on the market. But in the end, people will always go back to fiat currency, and governments will never, ever, ever give up their control of the fiat currencies.